it was clear evidence that the market is, and I know you could say if you're on the other side of the aisle, well, I'm manipulating data. I'm just showing you what happened and was reinforced on CNBC. This was, I don't think, debatable necessarily. The market so far is showing that it's very favorable to a Trump administration.
Do you want a wealthy retirement without worrying about money? Welcome to the Retire in Texas podcast, where you will discover how to enjoy your faith, your family, and your freedom in the state of Texas. And now, here's your host, financial advisor, author, and all-around good Texan, Darryl Lyons.
Hey, this is Darryl Lyons, CEO and co-founder of PAX Financial Group. Thanks for tuning in to Retire in Texas. Remember, this information is general in nature. It's not intended to provide specific investment, tax, or legal advice. Visit paxfinancialgroup.com for more information. And for those who are not clients of PAX, click on the Connect With Us button, and we'll have an advisor connect with you, a 15-minute consult, just to see if it's a good fit. It may or may not be a good fit, but that's just a way to start an initial conversation. I've really been on a whirlwind the last couple of weeks. I was actually in New York. I was with an investment firm, Inspire. We rang the bell on the New York Stock Exchange, which was really an amazing experience, as you can imagine, with the launch of a new exchange-traded fund. PAX doesn't manufacture that fund, but we use them a lot. They invited us. So that was really neat. Then after that, I was home for a little bit, and then I went to the Alliance Defending Freedom Conference, which was in Florida, and quite a bit of plane exchanges and all that nonsense that you have to deal with when you travel. But it was an incredible experience and really met some very passionate and articulate people who are really fighting very hard for the freedom to express yourself, the freedom to express truth, and freedom of religion. And so if you haven't checked out Alliance Defending Freedom, you certainly should. It's been a whirlwind, and I'll try to encapsulate some of the experience for the podcast listeners here soon. I'd like to share an experiment with you. It's called the ASH experiment. Some of you guys may or may not have heard of this. It was done in the 1950s. There's a group of 8 college students that participate in a very simple task. Now, all but one of these college students were actors. They were all boys, college males. There was one that wasn't in on it. He was the exception. Everyone else was actors. All 7 were actors. The group was shown 2 cards. One card had a line on it, a little black line. And the other card had 3 different lines. And they were asked in the group, in the second card, which line matches the first card? And it wasn't a trick question. It was very obvious. There's a short one, there's one that matched, and then there was a very long one. So it's very clear, wasn't anything manipulative. You might have seen those before. Now, I'm condensing this experiment, but the actors in various scenarios collectively, with confidence, picked a line that was clearly not the same size. Clearly not the same size. So what we're trying to find out through this, it was a conformity experiment, is if all 7 of the actors said something that was clearly not true, would the one that's not in on it conform just because they feel uncomfortable or maybe they're second guessing themselves? And sure enough, it was about 35% of the time, after they did a lot of experiments, 35% of the time, the one that wasn't the actor conformed, even though it was very clear that all 7 of the actors picked something that was clearly not the same size. That one individual participant was not comfortable speaking his or her mind, or his mind in this case, because they were all men, and stating, what's wrong with you guys? That one's clearly not the same size. It was a conformity exercise that has been discussed in the field of psychology for a long time. Although the conformity thought process is very interesting, but I'm actually less interested in the conformity piece today and really interested in the cognitive dissonance. The idea that you're holding 2 competing thoughts in your head at the same time, and the anxiety that exists when you do that. In fact, if you look at the original Greek word of anxiety, it's actually 2 words combined, 1 verb and 1 noun. Divided mind. As I think about this participant who was not an actor and how he was struggling with these 2 competing thoughts and the anxiety that exists when you're struggling with these 2 competing thoughts, and how that same anxiety exists when we invest. I had some headlines hit my email box when I came back from some of these conferences. And one of them said, China submarine closes on a U.S. submarine. And the other one said, not shortly after that, Biden is about to crash the dollar. I can turn my news onto any AM radio host, specifically in the Christian space, and absolutely get a Chicken Little message. I've told you before, they're all sponsored by gold salespeople, all of them. So that's kind of their message now. But there's all these either truths or half-truths woven in there, and it's hard to discern. So I'm sitting here going, man, I want to be optimistic about the future, but I just heard something about the market crashing. And so it messes with our mind and creates anxiety. It gives us a divided mind. So I thought, let's just unpack what's going on in the world today. And I'll do that in just a short amount of time. I think at the very end, we may not have answers to what the future holds, but at least we will recognize that this is a consistent issue that we're all dealing with. And I think recognizing it is one of the most important things for us to do. And then I'll talk a little bit about solutions. But when it comes to solutions, that's a whole nother podcast. There's a lot of tactical things you could do. But let's just jump into the current state of affairs in our world right now. And let's just turn our attention to the markets in general. And the markets will start to focus in on the election here soon. I know the headlines are one thing, a lot of headline news about the election and whether Joe Biden will continue or not. But the markets have a lot of interest in inflation right now, still very much inflation focused. It was interesting because they came out with some June information, and you may or may not heard this, but it's the first time that we've seen the CPI, which we measure. It's not the only measurement, but one of the key measurements of inflation. It's the first time that we've seen it fall month over month in 4 years. Inflation now is back down to 3%, and the Federal Reserve has a target of 2%. I think many of us might say that's pretty convenient as we come into the election. Seems like there's maybe a little manipulation going on, but the reason it logically makes sense is because the way economics work is that when prices get too high, people vote with their wallets and they stop buying stuff. And so ultimately those prices come back down. And that's why we've seen used cars in the past year go down 10%. There's a certain inflection point where people just say, I'm not getting a Starbucks anymore. So that's how rationally things work in the markets. Prices go up, demand drops, and prices come back down. This is an ongoing trend. And if it is in fact true, and there's not this cohesive manipulation, then that's a healthy market. But we had this last market crash in 2008 that really was collectively a bunch of bank failures. Tell me how the banks are doing right now. The banks did this stress test, and it was facilitated by the Fed, and it tested them on severe economic situations, and all of them passed. So that's good. But I think if you dig into the tests themselves, I think a lot of people are challenging the efficacy of those tests and the data used. The bank's health is still questionable, but what about companies in general? Are they making money? Because we all invest in these companies collectively through mutual funds and exchange traded funds. I think that's a great question because we just want to know, are they making money or not? What's the truth here? Well, we know these big artificial intelligence companies are making a ton of money like NVIDIA. We know that for certain. But many of us are investing not in just the what we've called Magnificent Seven, but there's 493 other companies in that composite of S&P 500. Are they making any money? A lot of us have our retirement nest egg in those other companies, not just the seven. So are they or are they not making money? They haven't actually seen much growth since the fourth quarter of 2022. And so as excited we are about this stock market, a lot of us have companies that haven't made a lot of money in a while. But there has been some green shoots. I think if you look at this Bank of America forecast, they are forecasting some very attractive earnings here in the near future. And July 11th was a very interesting day because what we saw is some people call it a rotation. Some people call broadening out. They actually have two different meetings, but regardless, we saw very interesting growth opportunities in the smaller companies represented by the Russell 2000 and the bond markets that were completely different return profiles than those Magnificent Seven. So we saw some great returns in that July 11th day that hopefully will translate into future returns for those that own companies outside of the Magnificent Seven. But these big companies, they still matter. And we still have to pay attention to them. And so will Apple make money? Will they figure this thing out? I think what you're going to start seeing is a lot of products starting to not work as well because they require updates. And if you don't have a new Apple phone, then you don't get the update and some of the features don't work because they're not selling as many phones as they'd like. And they've got to figure out a way to encourage all of us who are still holding a bunch of old iPhones to upgrade because that's how they make money. And if we go into Tesla, which would also be one of those Magnificent Seven companies, we will see if they get any momentum in these self-driving vehicles, and that'll be the talk of the town here in the near future. But real estate, Darryl, what about real estate? Especially going back to the bank things, there's a bunch of real estate that these office buildings aren't being occupied because now people working from home and prices were crazy high. And some say there's just a huge tsunami of problems in these office buildings and regional banks are holding all this debt and it's just going to collapse. But the interesting thing is it looks to be orderly. It's not a huge surprise. We can see when these office buildings debt comes due. And honestly, private equity is sitting there licking their chops like an angel vulture waiting to buy some of these properties. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm almost done, but a couple more buts here. Just a couple more buts. Hang with me. But what about Israel and Ukraine? That's a mess and it's scary. I've got a divergence in thoughts because I have friends in Moldova and Ukraine. For those that don't know, we've started a ministry over there to get kids off the streets onto the basketball court to learn about life, leadership, and Jesus. And one of my dear friends over there, who's a coach, was 30 minutes from arriving at the hospital because his son had a stomach issue and a missile destroyed the hospital. It's on camera. He sent me all the information on it, videos on it. It's crazy. My bigger concern is that we've become numb to what's going on in there. And there's a lot of good people that are suffering. That's probably my biggest concern. I do want resolve, just like all of us in Israel and Ukraine. And I think a lot of us have anchored into the money manipulation that does occur, which I think we've all recognized that there's just ridiculous amounts of money that are just going to nonsense. But my heart is still with some friends in that region. Darryl, I have one more but. And this but is Joe Biden. Uncle Joe Biden. What are we going to do there? Well, what's interesting, if you looked at the debates, was it a speech or debate? I have no idea what happened there. I actually do know what happened. But what was interesting is the market has a after hours trading feature called the futures market. It was very interesting when it was clear that Trump had a competitive edge over Biden. The stock market started to trickle up in the futures market. It was clear evidence that the market is, and I know you could say if you're on the other side of the aisle, well, I'm manipulating data. I'm just showing you what happened and was reinforced on CNBC. This was, I don't think, debatable necessarily. The market so far is showing that it's very favorable to a Trump administration, namely because of the regulatory environment. This is all clear. This is not polarization of politics. This is simply clear. Trump was less burdensome from a regulatory perspective. For that reason, companies like that environment. They can focus on growth and don't have to focus on DEI or other regulatory concerns that take up any free bandwidth that leadership has to focus on things that are really important. And so a Biden administration certainly has been more conducive to regulatory and those three-letter agencies. There's been a lot of burdens that have been put through there. I think what we're going to see is a favorable outcome that will be conducive to a good stock market. But a contested election, that seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? Regardless of the outcome. My biggest concern is that we have had fair weather generally in the stock market. We've had very fair weather. So if we do have a storm called a contested election, my biggest concern is how we collectively react to a storm. It's like, let's say we've had clear skies and all of a sudden it rains and we forget how to drive in the rain. That's probably my biggest concern. So as you can see, there's a lot of buts in the stock market. There's a lot of buts. And that's where this divided mind becomes problematic. I feel really, really confident long-term. And I think a lot of us do. I mean, there's just some cool things happening. Certainly artificial intelligence, these data centers, semiconductors, even thermal management for semiconductors, reshoring, bringing manufacturing back here, aerospace, bridges and highways being redone, which stirs up the economy, even these weight loss drugs. That's just the tip of the iceberg of all the good things that are happening through this American ecosystem. But we still have this cognitive dissonance, this divided mind that just we can't get away from. And I want to suggest this to you. This is very important. Emotions and money do not mix. It's like toothpaste and orange juice. Please remember that, and remember that smart investors, the Buffetts of the world, Peter Lynch's, all the big names, they think long term, and you think different when you think long term. Have a great day.